A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. It is my pleasure and my honor to have three speakers with us today. Some people are in their morning, some people are in their midday, and I'm in my night. So greetings to you relative to your time of day. And everyone in the gallery will have an opportunity to interact with the speakers after they've done their presentations. That'll be the first part. If you prefer to remain anonymous, you can put your question or comment in the chat, and I will monitor the chat. And I will read off your question if you just write in there anonymous or anon if you want to be brief. Um, if you're okay to ask your own question, I would ask that you do the thing in the chat that says raise your hand. There's a little thing that lets me know that somebody wants to ask their own question. You can put your questions in ahead of time. I'm just going to peruse them, but I'm not going to monitor. It's not like, oh, you can ask whatever you want to ask. So, it's still fairly closed. There shouldn't be any trolls, in other words. If you want to ask your question, but not have your video, you can turn your own video off and, ask your question just, you know, out loud, just using the audio. But you are still allowed to ask a question if you prefer to remain anonymous, because after a week on my Patreon page, I will be posting this as public to YouTube. We're trying to, in my estimation, pretty much we're clear that we're not going to forget this year. This is one of those years, just like, AC and BC, before COVID and after COVID, like everybody's going to remember this year. And I definitely take the advice of those who say, make it something that is going to be a positive memory. So for me, doing these friends along the way is one of the most positive things for me, simply because these really are friends. And when you think that the struggle is tough, it is. When you think that the trenches are deep, they are. But at the same time, it has been my pleasure and my honor to know some of the most amazing people. And the three ladies that we have with us, tongue in cheek, I can basically say this was my White History Month, because I did Michael first and now I'm doing these ladies. And also because as far as politics go, these are people in whom I have a tremendous amount of faith to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. They all know that Black Lives Matter. And I'm going to let them talk about really their journey to Islamic studies. And that may also overlap a little bit with their journey to Islam, but they're free to do that. And then a couple of things I've asked them to speak on. So we'll let that flow. I would ask also that you wait till I acknowledge you for a question or a comment, and that's only because I'm trying to pretend like I'm in control, which I'm not, which is COVID's teaching all of us that we're not in control. But it just helps me to kind of keep tabs on it, that you ask me to acknowledge you, and then I will do that, and that way there won't be any double talk. After they speak, I'm going to give them an opportunity to comment or question back and forth to each other. And in that time also, I hope to make a few additional comments. I'm really tempted when I get friends on there to just talk about why they're so amazing. And so I have to rein myself in and let them speak first, and then I get to say something. So eventually I also get to speak, and then we'll do the questions and comments, and I'll be watching the chat. So put anything in there at any time that you feel motivated. I'm going to start with Julian Hammer. Julian Hammer teaches religious studies at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She specializes in the study of gender and sexuality in Islam, race and gender in US Muslim communities, as well as contemporary Muslim thought, activism, and practice. She's the author of several books, including Peaceful Families, American Muslim Efforts Against Domestic Violence, American Muslim Women, Religious Authority and Activism, More Than a Prayer, and the co-author of A Jihad for Justice, The Work and Life of Amina Wadud, the Cambridge Companion to American Islam and Muslim Women and Gender Justice Concepts, Sources, and Histories. Julian, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I'll start by saying Bismillah, and then I want to gush a little bit and just talk about how honored I am to be considered one of your friends along the way, and how honored I am to be here and have this conversation with you, and I'm hoping for it to be a conversation. I will also admit that I'm really nervous. And it's my first public speaking engagement in, I don't know, 5 months, except for teaching. So all of this is coming together. I'm really giddy in a way that I don't usually know myself to be. So we were asked to talk about living the path, about our work, about Islamic studies, and the study of gender in Islam in the US Academy. And I want to start because we're talking about living the path, and say just a tiny little bit about myself that most people probably don't know. So I grew up in East Germany, in East Berlin, and started work as an activist, as a grassroots activist, both as a feminist and as a pro-Palestine activist as a teenager. And started Islamic studies in Berlin at Humboldt University when I was in my early 20s, and came to Islam in a circuitous sort of way, in the sense that I knew that I was looking for something, but I didn't really know what I was looking for. And so it took me until my late 20s to actually become Muslim. And within that time period, I also lived in Palestine for extended periods of time for research. So my research background early on was Palestine studies. And when I became Muslim, I think I just brought together things that I had experienced as already part of myself. One is, I think, a commitment to social justice. I think both the feminist piece and the Palestine activism piece point me towards the fact that I think we're inclined towards working for justice and that we're yearning for justice. And so I have always, I think, thought of my academic work as an important part of this. And so I will say a little bit more about what I've been working on and what I'm doing now, but also made a note to myself to make sure that I mention, and this has become incredibly important now, that a really important part of what I do is teaching undergraduates, which we all know is complicated, but also can be really rewarding. But I also train graduate students at UNC Chapel Hill in the religious studies program. And I think of my mentoring and training of graduate students actually as part of my activism, because it's become really important for me to help students and work with students to navigate an academic system that for many of them is not a good system, that doesn't work well for them. And so I see that as a really important part of the work that I do. I was thinking in preparing for this when you and I actually first met, and I think I figured it out. I first saw you in 2006 when you and Keisha did the One World book panel on both of your books at the American Academy of Religion. And I did introduce myself to you, but it was sort of this, you were a giant and I was this person from Germany who really had no idea what was happening most of the time. I also think now that it is interesting that I am part of this community, this collective now, but it actually took me quite some time to get there, because when I came to the US in 2002, the sort of what was then the sort of progressive Muslim community of academics had already been formed, and I was clearly not a part of it. And so it's taken me longer, I think, to sort of get involved, which just in turn makes it even more amazing that I'm here with all of you right now. I have very sort of intense feelings about that. And I was so in awe of your work that I ended up writing this book, American Muslim Women, Religious Authority and Activism, which more than a prayer, which is what I wanted the title to be, which focuses on the 2005 Woman-Led Friday prayer and the khutbah that you gave, but does that in a way that I think also tells the story of Muslim women's activism in the US context. And so you appear frequently and prominently in each of the chapters. But there's also a way in which I think it tells, it's sort of a historical accounting that I'm really proud of, that there is in fact a record of this work that has been happening. And I moved after that book was published, and the sort of attendant backlash, which I think in interesting ways sort of mirrored the backlash against the prayer and against you. I can't recount the number of times I presented about that project, and then someone in the audience said, but women are not allowed to lead prayers. And sort of like it became this, who's gonna say it first, especially in community settings. And in a sort of move that to me made sense, because I've been basically studying Muslim women's activism, I decided somewhere during that time, and actually in relation to feminist Quran interpretation, that I was interested in issues of justice, specifically the question of domestic violence, because I wanted to see what the people I now call patriarchal Muslims would have to say about that. So it's one thing to argue that women should lead prayers, and it's a very, I think, specific thing to say, no, we're going to use the Quran to justify domestic abuse, right? So like a topic where I wanted to see what the excuses would be there. That's how it started. And I worked on this project for a very long time. It's an ethnographic as well as textual project that looks at American Muslim efforts against domestic violence. I shadowed advocates, I did interviews, and I looked at enormous amounts of textual material around 434, the verse in the Quran that is often sort of brought up in this context. And I want to give a shout out to Laurie's article about that, which is still my very favorite piece about 434. And writing that book was incredibly hard, even though I wasn't directly working with victims of domestic abuse, even though many of the advocates are also survivors. It took me a very long time to write this book, and it came out almost exactly a year ago. And I have sort of stayed with these kinds of topics. I have several things that I'm planning to do, and then I'm going to be done talking. One is an article that is now accepted for publication that I'm nervous about, but I also thought was really important to write, which looks at arguments that patriarchal Muslim scholars have made against LGBTQI+ recognition. So this article is actually a product, a very, very late product of the conference at Duke that you invited me to. So it was a really important milestone for me to be there and to have that conversation. And I will admit that I'm kind of nervous about the response to that when it comes out, which will be something like 6 to 12 weeks from now. I'm trying to revise it. And I'm also involved in a participatory research project with Heart Women and Girls, an organization that was founded 10 years ago in Chicago to address sexual abuse in Muslim communities. That is sort of in infant stages right now, and obviously COVID has made it difficult to do the kind of research that I actually wanted to do with them. But that's going to happen in the long term. And I'm convinced that it is incredibly important to have that conversation and to have it now, and to ground it both in empirical research, but also in scriptural and textual frames. And so that is, it probably will, judging from how long the DV project took me, take a long time, but it's sort of a thing that's close to my heart. And so I'm trying to do all the things at the same time, which is a problem that I've had. Because initially I was always really worried that I would run out of things to do research about. And now I have the opposite problem. I have like these 4 things that I sort of think of on a piece of paper, and they're sitting there waiting for me to do something about them. So I had started a little bit of work with Musawa a few years back, and what has come out of that for me, I'm not sure what has come out of it for them, but what has come out of it for me is to very seriously think about activism as both religious practice and as production of knowledge. So I want to think much more carefully about where our notions of knowledge production actually reside, and how to maybe address the tension between scholars and activists that we so often talk about in contexts, in academic contexts especially, right? So like, as someone who has studied activists, I have sort of met this complication that it's actually not an ethical thing to do, to study activists and then criticize them for what they do. And so I had to ask myself, why am I doing this? What is my purpose in this? And so some of it is highlighting activist work, which I think is actually changing the world, maybe unlike some of the academic writing that some of us do. But also to contribute and to be part of these conversations. And I identify as a scholar activist, so this made sense to me. And then a project that I have now had some conversations about, and that I think will need to happen, is a book, inshallah, one day. There will be another book that I'm currently calling Patriarchal Islam, Sex, Gender, and Marriage in American Muslim Communities, in which I want to do something that seems really important to me at this point in time, because I have experienced, and I know that others in this community have as well, that the attacks against Muslim and Islamic feminists have really like gone into a frenzy in the past few years. There is a level of hostility and viciousness to the ways in which our work and our persons are being attacked, especially on social media, that always operates with the assumption that someone else will be able to decide whether we're actually Muslim and whether we're actually part of the spectrum of Islam. And so instead of like fighting back against that, what I'm planning to do in that book is actually chronicle and sort of create an archive of patriarchal arguments around gender and sexuality, and put them in their place to argue that patriarchal Islam is a particular sort of space on the spectrum of Muslim understanding and interpretation, but it's not the understanding, which is the claim that patriarchal Muslim scholars most often make. And so instead, I wanted to be in that place where it is one particular approach and one particular version. And in conversation with Keisha and other friends, I think I've also come to realize that it's really important in the US context to connect that analysis to the ways in which American Muslim scholars talk about race. Because it's actually a really interesting litmus test of how gender and race sort of intersect in Muslim communal discourses. And so that is the project right now, and I will see how it goes. Thank you.
Wow, that's fabulous. I'm going to try not to say something about it right now because I do want to. Instead, I'm going to introduce Keisha Ali, PhD at Duke University, is professor of religion and chair of the religion department at Boston University. Her research ranges from Islam's formative period to the present and focuses on Islamic law, gender and sexuality, and religious biography. Her books include Marriage and Slavery in Early Islam and Sexual Ethics and Islam, Feminist Reflections on Quran, Hadith, and Jurisprudence. She's currently working on an introductory book on women in Muslim traditions and a study of the gender politics of academic Islamic studies. You can read more about her work at www.keishaali.com. And Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you. Bismillah. It is absolutely an honor to be here, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation, although like you, I would actually just want to hear more about what Juliana talked about. I mean, my stuff is really boring to me. But I will take my cue from her and I will give a little bit of backstory. I really love, Amina, the way you framed it as a journey to Islamic studies as opposed to more often a journey to Islam, because the journey to Islamic studies actually starts for me also, like for my colleague, in an activist space. So I came of age politically in the 1980s. It wasn't Palestine for me, but Central America. Although some of the people I was working with, college students and community members, were also very active in Palestinian causes. Anti-apartheid was also a thing for us in the mid-'80s. And at the same time, I was slowly coming to think in more complicated ways about sexuality and the role of access to birth control and these other things within American contexts. And so, you know, I got in trouble with my high school principal as editor of the school paper, both for the thing I published about apartheid and for the thing I published about Planned Parenthood, right? And that actually is probably most of what you need to know about me as a teenager to make sense of what has happened since. I went to Stanford and I studied Latin American history. I also took some classes on the Middle East, and we didn't have a scholar of Islam there. Stanford's religious studies program was, as somebody once memorably said to me, less than the sum of its parts at that time. And so there was a local rabbi who came and taught a class on Islam, which I took. But I left Stanford having done more work to learn about the Middle East and Muslims. I left as a Muslim. I left as someone who was reading Fatima Mernissi, reading the scholarship that had begun to be published at that time to educate myself in the ways that I wasn't able to do in the classroom. But I left with a degree in history and in feminist studies, having done work with women's grassroots mobilization in Brazilian shanty towns, and went to graduate school at Duke to do a degree in what I thought was going to be 20th century Brazilian history. And I started taking Islamic studies classes. That was going to be my outside field. And it didn't happen that way, right? I got most of the way through my coursework for history and realized that I actually wanted to know more about Islam and about Muslim history. And by this time, I had read Quran and Woman. By this time, I'd read Women and Gender in Islam. And I had also learned to apply the historical lenses that were helping me make sense of 19th and 20th century Latin American women's movements, feminist movements, those archives, those narratives, to what was coming out in terms of a kind of Victorian modern rhetoric that I was hearing from Muslims, right? What was sort of the antecedent of today's hardened patriarchal discourses. Here is the sort of soft patriarchy that was being proffered about women's status in Islam, mostly soft. And I was recognizing the modern rhetoric as something I had also seen in Brazilian documents from the late 19th, early mid 20th century. And so that got me curious, and I ended up working on a dissertation project. I think I initially thought I was going to be looking at feminist Quran interpretation or modern family law in Muslim majority nation states. And instead, as a historian, I thought, well, what came before that? Okay, well, what's the underpinning of that? And I ended up writing about early Islamic law. My first book, however, even though the dissertation was really about the 9th century, maybe 8th to 10th century, if you kind of take it broadly, what you saw in the framing and what became sexual ethics is really this encounter that I was staging in my mind, but also with actual interlocutors and communities between what I was seeing today and then these early texts. Unfortunately, part of what happened in the process is that I sort of reified everything between 900 and 1900, as though that were one unified kind of modern Islam. You know, whatever. That was the way it was happening for me. And so sexual ethics really is the place where I was trying to work those things out. Marriage and slavery is my attempt, still very much as a feminist with a kind of transformational agenda, but not so much an intra-Muslim agenda, at saying, let's understand this discourse, this legal discourse on its own terms and see what we can do with it, see where it makes sense. In part because I think very much like what Juliana is saying about the patriarchal archive, it's by understanding this as coming from somewhere, being constrained and shaped in particular ways, that we see that it's not universal, inevitable, or timeless, right? It is a local project of particular people choosing in particular ways, and we could choose otherwise, right? And things could be otherwise, which is, of course, you know, what activists always think, right? And so bringing those two things together. You mentioned in the biography that you gave that I'm working on 2 projects, the attempt to write a book that is an introduction to women in Muslim traditions. I mean, I'm basically a decade late writing this book, and there are all sorts of complicated reasons why the book isn't done. But part of it is because as someone who's aware of the power of grand narratives and totalizing narratives, I see all the pitfalls of the ways we normally do it. And yet it's actually really difficult not to do it that way. And so I'm in this continual process of sort of trying to get an arc, trying to get something useful, and then recognizing how pitiful it is and how it reinforces certain kinds of Sunni-centric, Arab-centric, teleological, jurisprudence-heavy kind of norms for what's going on. Or, you know, I write the whole thing and Southeast Asia just doesn't show up until, you know, we get a mention of Sisters in Islam in chapter 8. Like, it might actually end up being that way, but that's hard. And so I am very much still working on that. But it is much harder. And this, again, goes to some of what Juliana was saying, to build things than to critique them, right? Critique is really easy and it's also necessary, but it's never sufficient. And writing an introductory text has certainly taught me that, or attempting to write one. The other thing that I'm working on is a book about the gender politics of academic Islamic studies. And that level of vitriol from some of our colleagues situated within Islamic studies, not just sort of random patriarchal preachers or lay figures in communities, but Muslim men in the academy, is really interesting. I mean, it certainly gives me fodder for things to write about, but it's also really frustrating that we still are where we are, you know, almost 20 years after I got my doctorate. That's a short summary that moves from, you know, teenage activist to present day chair of department. I didn't really talk about, you know, the fact that I had a part-time job as I was finishing my dissertation with the Feminist Sexual Ethics Project at Brandeis, funded by the Ford Foundation, working with Bernadette Bruton for a project on slavery's long shadow over the lives of women and girls. That brought me into conversation with a number of really interesting thinkers working on other traditions, including Monique Moultrie, who was a master's candidate at the time, including Gail Leibovitz, who is now professor at the American Jewish University. We don't remember. She's in LA, also ordained rabbi, who was basically writing the dissertation about Judaism that I was writing about Islam in terms of time and place and the kinds of texts and the kinds of arguments. So that was a really formative experience. I went to Harvard Divinity School and had a one-year research and teaching fellowship. I went back to Brandeis and had a 2-year postdoc. And that's where I was working on marriage and slavery, but also had the space to do sexual ethics and Islam. And that process of having light teaching responsibilities and institutional support for 3 years of fellowship, basically, after I finished my doctorate, before I started a tenure track job at Boston University in 2006, gave me the space to think really differently about what my academic career might look like. And I had small children at the time, and I didn't look for tenure track jobs outside of the Boston area. I had the luxury not to do that, and also the constraints, right, that meant that I couldn't do that. And that meant that I wasn't as worried as I think a lot of people are about producing the monograph first and producing peer-reviewed articles and doing all of the kinds of things to play a particular academic game. And the reason I mention this is because I think now that I've been promoted to full professor, I'm serving as department chair, I train graduate students, although not as many as get trained at UNC. I teach undergraduates. I think of my role in terms of Islamic studies, even though I do much less day-to-day activism kinds of things, I think of my role as being an advocate and a support for people in and outside of academia to both help them pursue paths that will be useful to them, to arrogate and appropriate what resources they can from existing systems in the support of projects that actually in some ways seek to undermine those systems, and to also work for and advocate transformation within those systems. And so part of what I'm trying to manage in this COVID moment is, yes, on the one hand, get my own publications moved, at least gently, towards publications so that they can hopefully be, additional fodder for conversation as we move forward. But I also take really seriously the fact that for some of my colleagues, whether they get things published or not is make or break for them in terms of academic stability. And then for other people, no matter how well they do, the system is not going to find a place for them. And so trying to find what I can do in my current situation to be a support and to be a resource, and to be the harridan who screams the inconvenient things and everybody says, oh God, what a bitch, right? But I'm professionally secure enough that that's not a huge concern at this time. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. There is a little bit of feedback. I can hear you clearly because I do have on earphones. I can hear you clearly, but there's something else that's happening. And so anybody in the gallery, just double check that you are muted just to make sure that that's not the cause of it. Again, my tech skills are really limited. Thank you. Okay, Laurie Silver is a retired historian of early Sufism and the lives and practices of early pious and mystic women. She was also an activist in the gender jihad movement, working on the response to Dr. Wadud's 2005 prayer. From there, she organized women-led prayers with Nakia Jackson, co-founded and content edited the website progressiveislam.org, published scholarship on gender concerns in Islam, and most recently co-founded the Toronto Unity Mosque in 2009, a gender equal LGBTQ open worship space. Now she channels her academic and activist impulses into writing historical fiction, the Sufi Mysteries. Laurie, you have the floor.
Assalamu alaikum and bismillah. Alhamdulillah. You know, I mean, I'm going to have to really, everybody knows that I'm an extremely emotional person. And I'm a bit of a ditz. My ex-husband's mother once said to me as an insult, but I actually thought, wow, this is so accurate. She said that I was the smartest ditz she ever met. And I think that's really, really so exactly who I am. And I'm just so honored to be here and to be with all of these people and some of the people I see in the gallery too. I'm just, you know, I'm a bit overwhelmed. I don't have a big professional background to give. When I was in high school, I was really angry. You know, I've joked about my rage years lasting from 5 to 40. You know, I was super, super angry, and I was a punk kid in the 70s and nearly failed out of high school, worked junky jobs, and then realized I was going to need to have benefits at some point. So I went to junior college and discovered that I liked doing schoolwork because I had some really wonderful professors. But I thought, because I like to read, I'd be a high school English teacher. So I transferred to University of New York, State University of New York, Stony Brook, where I was getting a BA in American and English literature, my goal to be a high school English teacher, when I took a study of another culture course in order to graduate. And that was with William Chittick on Ibn al-Arabi and Meister Eckhart. And I read Ibn al-Arabi and I was completely blown away. This was everything I had ever wanted, and spoke to my rage, but also spoke to my desire for peace from that rage. And I think the only way I can describe it is to say is that I really needed a God who took responsibility for everything. And Ibn al-Arabi gave me that. Ibn al-Arabi gave me a God who took responsibility for everything. And this was what I needed to journey towards peace. But as I was doing that, William Chittick decided that he wanted me to be his graduate student. And I had already been accepted into the English department for a master's that would lead to a teaching degree. And he got my acceptance in that department transferred to his department, and he brought me into his program. And that's how I started my academic career. Purely accidental. This was not a thing that I had planned at all. And I made a fool of myself this way to Sunday because I had been a bad student in high school. I had probably a B average in my major, and I think I had a C average overall as an undergraduate. I did so badly on my GREs that it's a surprise that I even got into the graduate program at all, except for that I had some professors in the English department who were really behind me. My language skills are garbage. It took me so long to get a hold of Arabic at all, and finally be able to use it well enough for my scholarship. But Chittick was amazing, and he believed in me, and he brought me through everything and taught me how to be a very close reader of texts. But through all of this, I was becoming Muslim, and I was finding this path in Islam through Sufism, but also looking through the lens of Sufism. You know, if you're not looking at it in just one particular way, especially because I was focusing on early Sufism, you see the extraordinary diversity of thought and diversity of practice and diversity of experience of Islam, especially in the early period before the institutionalization of Sufism begins and a singular story starts to be told. I felt that Islam was as diverse as it was that I was seeing, but somehow, long story details I don't want to share, I ended up taking on an Islam spiritually and religiously that was very narrow. And I started to deny my own conscience. I had, for instance, prior to converting, took a study of another, not a study of another culture course. I took a historical independent study with a professor on LGBTQ Muslims and in history. And I had to know first that that was going to be a thing that was not going to be a problem before I would even convert, right? So there were all these things that were necessary for me. The position of women in Islam, all of these things were essential to my conversion. And yet, as my Islam progressed, I ended up falling into this trap of neo-traditionalism and becoming very narrow. And I can, and I know for personal reasons, what I really wanted was God to love me. And there were these people saying, for God to love you, you have to hate all these other things, and you have to hate yourself, and you have to deny your own conscience. And so, I got caught up in that, and it created a really difficult life for me in a lot of ways, which ended amazingly with your prayer, Dr. Wudud. Omid Safi said to me at an AAR conference, do you want to join this group, this progressive Islam group? I was like, what's that? And I had just been coming out of this personal journey away from that kind of Islam, but I had no idea where to go or where to take it with. I didn't know a lot of other Muslims. I had no idea what to do, and they were just organizing your prayer. It hadn't happened yet. And I was still so scared at that time that when we were all together at an organizing meeting in New Jersey prior to your prayer, Pamela Taylor was set to lead prayers, and I lied and said that I had my period so that I wouldn't have to follow her because I still couldn't get it out of my head. You know how this is anyway, that I couldn't do it. And I was secretly relieved that I had a trip planned while you were giving your prayer, and I was going to be out of the country when you did it, because I felt like, well, this is a thing we have to do for a matter sort of civil disobedience, but it's wrong. I was still in that head at that time. It took so long to unravel and unwind these things. And to return to my conscience. And so your work, and specifically too, Quran and Woman, and reading about 434, Keisha's work. I think I remember at one point writing Keisha an email after I read sexual ethics, where I used many expletives about, how powerful the work was for me, and the truth telling she was doing, Quran and Woman, the truth telling that you were doing. And then ultimately when I met Juliana, the kind of truth telling, all these women and men and other people who were doing all this truth telling, and through this group, I came to meet El Farouk, another truth teller, all these people who were just, who would just say what they needed to say. And this is really sort of my inner personality, is this completely unprofessional person who cannot control their mouth, who over time I've been trying to sort of learn how to do that, but it's not me. So I came through the other side. Now, in the meantime, I got a job at Skidmore College where, you know, for complicated personal reasons, I was unable to finish my tenure track job there, and had to resign and left and moved to Canada, where I remarried this extraordinary, lovely person who Dr. Wadood has met, and who, you know, and who said, if I ever left you for another woman, it would be Dr. Wadood. You know, I don't, if nobody's ever met Dr. Wadood, you know, her presence is like, wow. Anyway, and so, and I told myself I wasn't going to tell that story before we got started, and yet, you know, so that's my mouth. So in any case, you know, so I ended up here, and I ended up meeting El Farouk and Troy Jackson and other people, and we were going to the Noor Center, and I started teaching as an adjunct at University of Toronto, and we were at the Noor Center, which is wonderful and lovely, but we were all sort of frustrated that that there were certain limits to how how women and queer people could be at the front of things there, and we just decided we were also too, I mean, to be honest, tired of fighting, and just thought, let's stop fighting, let's just build something. And so, you know, we decided to create this mosque. And in the beginning, some days it was just the three of us in El Farouk's living room, and other days there were more and more, and it's carried on. I eventually had to leave the mosque for various reasons, which we could talk about later if anybody wants to do that. It's an extremely difficult thing to do to run a mosque, and the pastoral care that's involved in that I wasn't frankly up to doing, and ultimately had to leave for those reasons, and carried on with my work now. Ultimately, when I did my sort of my last bit of scholarship was this work on early pious and Sufi women, where I sort of said everything I wanted to say, you know, within the constraints of the word limit, and then went on and started writing this fiction. But the fiction started actually because I was pushed out of my adjuncting job at University of Toronto, and sort of left with nothing, and I had to find some place for this mouth to keep talking, to keep having something to say. And so my fiction sort of allowed me that, you know.
So I want to just jump in and say something about why I wanted the three of you to be together. I, like Laurie, came to the end of my U.S. academic, you know, sojourn, and I retired actually in 2006. And the three of you got together, and we had first a conference that was a closed group, and then we had you know, a conference that was open to, you know, other presenters. And they did this collection, this volume, Jihad for Justice, right? You think I remember the name. In any case, in honor of my work. Some of what you guys were saying about the maliciousness of some of the patriarchal trying to claim Islam as their Islam as the Islam. Some of that was obviously problematic for me, but not as much actually as my feeling that US academia was not going to be the venue for the production of new knowledge in Islam. And once I got wind of that possibility, I think I just didn't want to go anywhere else. So, you know, in the 15 years since I retired, it's pretty much confirmed that the leading of Islamic thought is not from US academia. Yet for, yes, and Julian has put in the chat the link to the Jihad for Justice, because it's an ebook, so it's available online, so you can get it. And actually, some of the people in the gallery wrote for it, and many other wonderful people. But the thing was that I didn't see myself as much at the end of academia as I was, but with this collection, like the effort that was made to pull this together on my behalf, I think I want to say it was one of the best things that happened to me in all of the years that I spent in US academia. Because first of all, the three of you are very serious in terms of your own, however fickle, Laurie, in terms of your own contributions, dedications, and research in Islamic studies. So to acknowledge me and my work, and to also find, a couple dozen other people who acknowledged me and my work was just the most wonderful thing that happened to me, because I actually feel like academia should have been my natural home. I come from a poor family, and no one in my immediate siblings ever went to the university. And I have 3 degrees. In fact, that's what my mother described it as. I just know you have all them degrees. So that already kind of set me apart from my family. But what was the motivation was my own kind of geek interested in knowledge and learning and experiencing other ways of seeing the world. And so that's been my life trajectory, really. And to come to the end of my tether with regard to US academia, and to have 3 scholars whom I respect and love treat me and my work that way was just something that I'm incredibly grateful for, even still. It's also a great volume. It's just as far as what people said and how far they went to get different people to speak back. But the very idea, I don't know if you remember that movie, The Beautiful Mind, where they put the pen on the table. It's the boys' club. It's like all men in there, and they put the pen on the table as an acknowledgement of the scholarship of someone who is leaving. And I felt like that. I felt like, okay, well, I really worked hard, but for some reason, there's certain corners of the academy where I don't get the reception that hard work was at all fruitful. Obviously, I'm over that because I see that there's fruits that come in many different ways, alhamdulillah. But I think instead of being depressed about, leaving the only job, really that I've ever had, and being jobless for 15 years, I instead was just so honored. And the particulars of it were very meaningful. It was not trivial. And so it is that level of respect that you have shown for my work, while I respect your work, that really, really made me want to bring the 3 of you together. I actually think that Julian has written more about me than anybody that I know. And so she's got some interesting volumes there, and also because of the way that she, as a scholar, looks at the ground, looks at what's happening, and yet at the same time does a very German thing. It's very analytical. Keisha already knows that she's my favorite Islamic scholar of all times and all places. So I will just continue in that location. I'm so amazed by her, and I'm so in awe of what she puts together. Case in point, when she did the first article and the AAR presentation on just the sheer quantitative citations of the male scholars with regard to female scholars, it was so transformative. It's just, I'm like, it's not me. It's not, like Laurie, I can't control my mouth kind of thing. It's not me. They're really doing this. And she made it, she diffused all of the tension that was there, because it was like, okay, it's just in your face. Either you're doing it or you're not doing it. And I just thought, oh my goodness, So I'm so in awe of the work that you've done. Actually, Keisha was the only person that ever made a critique of mine in the volume on progressive Muslims about, you know, the Quran centeredness of my work. We've talked about it since then, and of course, life has shown that there are different ways in which you can approach that. But I remember that because it took me several years before I could say anything to her about it. And Laurie, with the We Are the People, actually just kind of quieted down for me some of the opposition to the female-led prayer, because it reminded me that I'm part, you know, of this tradition. I'm part of the Ummah, and my part may not suit everyone, but you know, I still have membership. So I really specifically have appreciated the scholarships that have come, you know, from you ladies, and that you also saw, you know, to focus some attention on my work. So I'm deeply honored, and it, you know, keeps me sane in those moments when my insanity is greater than what allows me to go forward with life. I have to say one last thing before opening up, and that is that I've told Laurie this, that when she started writing the fiction, she asked me if I would read it. And I thought, okay, well, Laurie's my friend, and, you know, I'll do this for her, but, you know, I'm probably not going to like it. I love her work. Oh my God, her fiction is just so amazing. So if you have not read her fiction, one is called The Lover and the other is called The Jealous. You should definitely order it, because you will really, 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 really see why. It's just amazing. She has the ability to see in historical context in a way that's clearly informed by the scholarship, but also tremendously by, you know, her own imagination. And you know, I'm very pleased that you ladies all agreed, and we will allow you to talk to each other if you would like for a little while, and then in, you know, 5 or 10 minutes we can see what's happening in the gallery as far as comments and people who want to be acknowledged. You might want to just say, I'd like to say something right now, so I can recognize you in the chat. To each other, you would like to say?
I'll say something, which is, it's really been wonderful actually hearing these kind of overlapping recountings of the ways that our paths have intersected and overlapped and diverged. And I'm really glad, Amina, that you mentioned that closed door workshop, because that was, I think, maybe 2 years, maybe 3, before we did that conference. And Aisha Hidayatullah helped organize it. Fatma Sidat from South Africa was there. Sadia Yaqub, who I think was maybe even still finishing her dissertation at the time. Hina Azam, who was my classmate at Duke, actually, and is now tenured faculty at UT Austin. And what was so astonishing for me in that moment was actually being in a feminist space within Islamic studies where half of the scholars were focused on law, right? Because that's not a thing really that happens, or certainly it wasn't a thing that was happening, you know, 5 years earlier. And it's really a rare thing that happens now. And I think, you know, the insight about the various kinds of methodologies that we use, we're in a very different place in 2020, even if there are some people who don't really recognize this, right? We're in a very different place in 2020 than we were even in 2006. But I've been recently doing some work looking at the 90s. And I just really want to emphasize again how important Quran and Woman was, not as the final word, right? But as the sort of opening salvo in a kind of conversation that's become so much broader. If it weren't for Quran and Woman, and then Leila Ahmed's Women and Gender in Islam, which was published the same year. I mean, 1992 was a really important year. None of this would be possible, right? And I think part of what, I don't remember if it was Juliana's idea or Lori's idea or Aisha's idea after this workshop to do the Festschrift, right? That became a jihad for justice and to make it open access. It wasn't mine, although I saw readily enough how important it would be. What people didn't give you as a scholar, as a woman, as a Muslim, as a Black woman, as a hijabi in the US Academy was the complement of taking your work seriously as scholarship. Not that nobody did, but broadly the Academy didn't. And part of what we wanted to do with that volume was, yes, do something that was sort of the kind of thing that you do, you know, for the Germans when they retire, for the men, for the Orientalists, for the philologists, but also do it in a way that wasn't just an attempt to say, look, she succeeds by your terms because we've done this thing, but actually say, we're going to take this kind of vessel, we're going to take this kind of symbolism, and we're actually going to make it open access. We're going to democratize it. We're going to take this thing and subvert it to our own purposes, right? And let there be fiction, and let there be poetry, and let there be essays. And yes, let there be academic articles. And then we're simply going to make it freely available because that's exactly what your career and your scholarship has been about, right? Is about making knowledge accessible and refusing to follow the script that says you only deserve to be taken seriously if you do it in this particular way. So thank you for that.
I feel like Keisha said it all. You know, that was really, I mean, that was an extremely important gathering that we had, very moving for all of us, and that it was closed door and private, and that we were all able to sort of say the things that meant so much to us in a really safe way, and disagree sometimes strongly about things, and work that all together. But what Keisha said about the Festschrift, to me, this is it, is that you know, that Amina deserved to have this, and she deserved to have it in a way that deconstructed all those norms that had excluded her. And so I can't add anything else. It was my honor to take part.
I'll just add two things. One is my partner Jamil still calls this closed door workshop the summit. Not a summit, it was the summit, and there's never been one like it after that. And also, I want to remind us that it wasn't only the Festschrift, but also the conference that at Boston University that was in your honor, Amina, that was explicitly built around the same idea of here are ways to recognize not just broader questions of Muslim women and the challenge of authority, which is what we called it, but also make central your own work. And we were honored that you were there. I vividly remember the moment when we gave you the volume. As I said in the chat, I'm still insanely proud of this volume. It's actually the best thing I have done as an academic, because it is subversive and because it just does so many things. I direct people to it still all the time. I cherish my own hand-printed paper copy that I own. I mean, it's been an amazing journey with all three of you. I'm starting to get emotional, so I will stop here before the German starts crying on camera. But it's just really profound. And for me, that summit was actually my first sort of own initiative to say, I have something to say in this conversation. I am part of something. For me, academic work really only is meaningful when it's dialogical, when there are people to talk to. And I like what Keisha said earlier about not only criticizing, but also building. I think of my own work in that way, but I also have to perpetually remind myself that building is not what academics are encouraged to do. And so I want to at least briefly mention that having taught at this public university for 9 years now, I still get pushback about whether I somehow skirt or transgress this boundary to the normative, the prescriptive, the too feminist, the too religious, even though I don't see my own work as explicitly quote unquote theological. I experience it as constant pushback. And I know that, that's probably part of what your experience was too, in very different ways, in very different embodied ways. And I want us together to be proud of resisting that. I still have to care a little bit, but I'm also in a better position to just say, if this is not what you think scholarship is, do I really care? No, not so much anymore, right? So I would, at this point, I have thought about leaving the academy many, many times. There are moments where it's just really too much of all kinds of things, where I feel like being part of it is legitimating all the abuses that are happening and all the marginalizations and all the oppression, including the financial oppression of graduate students, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I've also sort of about twice a year, I make the decision to stay because at this point, it allows me to do certain things in certain ways while acknowledging that I also don't really know what else I would do. I don't think I will write novels, so.
Okay, so we have some comments, and if I am not mistaken, the people who've made the comments are willing to jump in to do them because nobody said anonymous. So Eleanor Holland, do you wish to speak to the gallery?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm
Salam.
academic. I'm a calligrapher. I'm an artist, but I don't know how much I want to say about myself. I'm a Muslim. I come from a long, many years of being in a tariqat and have reached a point of no longer being able to tolerate the patriarchy. So I'm just looking for like-minded women. I mean, I have a bachelor's degree in religious studies and kind of been around a little bit, but I'm not an academic like y'all. Yet I'm, stuck in the Islamic world, and I'm always dealing with Islamic texts, and I love the text. But anyway, I'm just looking for sort of community. So I appreciate listening, although I can't relate to all the issues with academia.
Thank you. Farah, are you willing to make your comment to the gallery? Did we lose her? This is the thing about monitoring. I have to see in the process.
Actually, she answered to me privately so far.
Oh, okay. All right. So Annie, I know you will join us.
Yeah. Greetings, everyone. Salam alaikum. I'm based here in Los Angeles, founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values, and I find these meetings really inspiring, and also motivates me to keep going as well because of the challenges of building community, which is very, very challenging. My question to the scholars of Islam here, why is it that, like Julianne was saying, that you are discouraged from building? And I think because as a community organizer, we validate the way we practice our Islam. We live, we bring what is black and white text to life. And what you have created, you have given us the oxygen in order for us to do the work that we do, and justifiably so in the context of Islam. And for me, I see a total allyship and a validation of your work at the community level. And I find that a lot of time folks in the academia are very, obviously with exceptions in your cases, but for the most part, there is a distance between not wanting to get your hands dirty. And I find this very frustrating because we do book readings and we use your books, and that's how we promote the progressive and inclusive Islam and the justice-rooted Islam. To Eleanor, I don't know where you are, where you live, but you know we are in the United States and other communities in Europe as well. So feel free to reach out. So if you could answer that question, that would be really appreciative. How can we build the community with academia? That would be fantastic.
Yes, ladies, you have the floor.
Juliana, I think this one's for you.
Really, you think this one's for me? So I'll sort of try and not make it academic because I think there is sort of a personal dimension to that. I think one of the things that I expected to sort of get out of becoming Muslim was a community. And I would say that I've been searching for a community, and that I've spent a lot of time in the past 20 plus years feeling like there are communities and I'm just not part of them, which is probably the most human of feelings about community and belonging. And I'm also an immigrant, so belonging in the United States is a very, very tricky thing, let me tell you, especially as a Muslim. And so I think I have come to a place where, one, I have realized that community is what you build, not what you join, that there is a huge difference between expecting to find the right people and then be with them. Like Eleanor, I was part of a tariqa for a long time and it didn't go very well. And there were huge issues, social kinds of issues. I live in a place here in Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill doesn't even have a mosque. I don't know if I would join it if it had one, but at this point, it doesn't have one. And so my community has always been, or is now much more one that I built. It's a community with some of my graduate students. Some of this is just about healing. It's a virtual community with all these wonderful people. I was scrolling through the gallery and I was seeing so many people I know, many of whom I've met in person, which I'm very, very excited about. So, and the relationship between scholars and grassroots activists, I think is complicated on the scholar side because I have experienced the analytic sort of tendency that I have, and that is sort of my job, as potentially paralyzing for activist work because we overthink. We consider too much of what could, you know, be problematic about it, problematic being one of our very favorite words. And so I don't make a distinction anymore between my scholarship and my activism. I have considered writing this Patriarchal Islam book as a series of blog posts because it might do a different kind of work. So And I mean, I will say there is a specific dynamic in Islamic studies that has to do with anti-Muslim hostility, with the history of religious studies in the United States and Canada, where constructive work, the building work that Annie, that you're asking about, is really not encouraged because it's considered suspect. It's considered something that's not real, objective, male, white scholarship. These are the criteria, right? And we are, at this point, I experience the work I do as subverting and resisting. As Keisha was saying, it's about finding resources in an academy that are not meant for the purposes that we use them for. Hello, UNC. And doing things with it that the institution as part of the system is not intending to happen, and to do that until someone tells me that I can't do that anymore. I approach the American Academy of Religion in a similar way. I'm all about making trouble in all the work that I've done there, because I think it has the potential to be subverted in that way and be used in that way for the purpose of change and at the same time a kind of community building.
Any other responses? Because we have some other comments in the chat, or we can move on. Laurie?
Let me just say one brief thing, if you don't mind. One of the things that's most interesting to me as I do this work on the woman question in Islamic studies, which is the book about the gender politics, is looking at the way that religious studies as a feminized discipline and women's work within religious studies and non-binary scholars' work within religious studies as sort of suspect, particularly when it seeks to be constructive. Really interesting if you contrast it with, for instance, work in, say, international relations that's intended to have policy dimensions, or security studies, right? There, people don't say, oh, that's just practical or applied or constructive. It's not objective. We can't take it seriously, right? There, the fact that it's meant to actually have some kind of impact is part of what makes it valuable. And so it's, you know, it tells us something when work that we want to have, we want to see have impacts on the ground, is stigmatized as therefore not serious.
I just want to, it's not speaking to Annie's question, but related, and going back to Farah's question, which is in the chat, which is about sort of creating grassroots change in challenging contexts and traditional and patriarchal contexts. And maybe this is going to sound weird, but I found it impossible to do in those contexts, and that there was a certain point where I was constantly engaging in these contexts in a good faith manner, and really trying to see if I could bring people into conversation. And my husband, Mike, he says to me, you know, why are you talking to people who don't think that you're fully human? And I was like, wow, okay, this is actually a fact that was just relayed to me. And I cut everybody off, and I stopped doing that. And this is sort of around the time that El Farouk and Troy and I were just talking about just building something. And so I think one of the things that we've seen happen is that if you build things without worrying about what other people are going to say, you have to protect yourself in certain ways, but you build, you know, like Dr. Wadud has done. She's just built over the years, right? You build. There are all these people in those contexts, in those traditional patriarchal. I don't even want to say traditional because they're not traditional. I really want to push back against that, right? This is this notion of tradition that, frankly, they've put a lot of energy into telling us is tradition, when in fact historically, you know, it's a very particular viewpoint, a very particular argument that's not that doesn't even accurately give us an account of how things were in the past. So that's why we call it neo-traditional now, because it's sort of a romanticization of the past. But, you know, so in these patriarchal contexts, you know, and these you know, homophobic, anti-LGBTQ context, this kind of stuff, you know, you just build something new, and then there are these people who are in there who need your voice, and eventually they hear it in some ways through social media, through others, through personal accounts, and they are drawn into these larger conversations. And Farah, as you know, I mean, there's people doing LGBTQ activism all over the world, and you speak to people who then hear that one voice, and that one voice is everything to them, and brings them, and maybe they build their own space. So I feel like it's a much more organic thing that should not be that we should stay away from engaging with them in a way unless somebody's got the energy to do that. And there was one thing I wanted to say, but now I'm forgetting because I'm having a senior moment. But there was you know, I think the thing is that you build things, and then when people come and they hear it and they respond, and we do it in this kind of organic way is what I wanted to say. It was the healthiest thing for me. I personally couldn't take part in those conversations anymore. And I do want to add too that, like, I feel like the activism I'm doing now, writing it, my activism is in my novels. Like, if you read my novels, you can see I'm doing very, very serious work about sort of opening up this idea of what tradition was, and talking about the past as this very complex place with these very complex human relations and human experiences as well. And so anything you do can be activism that reaches people. And my biggest fans actually turn out to be Salafi, Hanbali, Niqabi women. I've got a big group of them who really, really love the books, because I've got a Hanbali hero in there who's just this sweet guy, you know, and he goes through some struggles in the second book, which one of them found disturbing, but she went through the struggles that he had to go through, and one of the things that he has to go to is that he betrays his own conscience by listening to you know, to tradition in a way that leads him away from his heart, and he has to struggle with that. So creating these kinds of discourses, I think, can draw people in these myriad of ways. So I just wanted to say that.
Farah, do you want to share?
Yes, please. Thank you. I just want to take a minute to say something, and that's this, that it's wonderful to see all of you, as I have over the very many years, support one another and build communities of support, collegial support, academic support. But I also want to take a minute to really acknowledge that your work is still the work that I build on, your work, all of you. I still remember the day, Amina, your books have arrived at my home in the post. Keisha, I remember the day I ran out to get your book. Juliana, your book, Peaceful Families, is one of the first books I ordered in my new job to make sure that wherever I work, these books are available to the students there. So it's ways that we create communities that support one another to build on the work. And it allows me to do the kind of subliminal activist academic work that I do, whether that's quiet or whether that's open. And Laurie, I have to admit that your work, your activism work with the Unity Mosque is still very dear to me, even though I'm wasn't directly part of that process. I'm very aware of what the Unity Mosque does. I fully support them. I go whenever I can, but it gives us hope. These kind of intercollegial subliminal spaces that all of you have created really are still the tools. You are the giants upon whose shoulders I still stand. I'm forever grateful. Thank you.
Alia? Yes, you mute. Down at the bottom, there should be. Nope, you're still mute. You're still mute, John. You're still mute.
Hello, Amina. Okay, thank you for asking me. I've sent some questions anyway, but no, I've thoroughly enjoyed knowing many of you, and I'm so delighted I've got to know you all personally. I haven't met Keisha, but other than that, I think I've known all of you. I think without you all, we couldn't have, the activists like me, couldn't have done the work in the field. And you've been such a huge support and so on. So I'm sorry to hear about academic and the difficulties, but don't ever give up hope, because you are remarkable scholars, remarkable women, and remarkable activists. So that's all I need to say. And thank you for including me, Amna. I hope you're keeping well.
Thank you. Missing you.
If
Thank
I
you.
could just say, I mean,
Come and see me. Laurie doesn't come to see me either.
I just want to say, I mean, if people who don't know Alia Hogben is one of the great activists in Canada, you know, with the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, who has transformed the face of Islam here in Canada. So, you know, I mean, I can only offer you that it's an honor to be in any space with you.
Thank you, Laurie. Margot comes to see me, doesn't she? Hello, Margot. Thank you, Amina. I'm going to leave you now because I have some people downstairs.
Okay, salam alaikum.
Yeah, wa alaikum assalam. Look after yourself.
Saima, you had your hand up. You still want to share?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amina Jan. Oh, the sun just came out literally this moment, so you get to see that too. Thank you so much to everyone for sharing, and to Dr. Wadud for creating this amazing space for all of us to hear from you. I feel like this is such a juicy example of all four of you as academic activists, as Juliana so beautifully described. It used to feel to me that academia lives in this ivory tower that isn't connected to real life. But now I feel like there's such an increase in especially female academic activists. And my question was, is there an increase in academic activists, or has this group always existed and social media is just allowing more of us to hear from you? Thank you.
I guess since I'm writing about academic Islamic studies, this is on me, right? Okay. Yes, there are more Muslims in Islamic studies than there were in US academia. Yes, there are more women as a proportion of Islamic studies academics and people researching Muslim women. It's certainly not unprecedented, but if we look, you know, at who was in these jobs in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, it looks very different now than it did. And this is one of the things that we learn when we learn about misogyny. I recommend Kate Mann's book, Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny. She's a philosopher. It's very philosophical. She's got something else coming out that will perhaps be slightly more readable. But I recommend the first book anyway. You just have to drink a lot of coffee while you read it, or tea. She really talks about the way that part of what's prompted more virulent forms of misogyny is precisely women's progress, right? So the old forms of sexism, right? Women just aren't competent, don't work. So now you have to have a new story. And I think that's part of why we see the kind of really vicious patriarchal backlash to women, Muslim women, Muslim feminists within the academy, is partly because, to the extent that we have been successful in some ways in changing the conversation, there's a need to delegitimize the project. Using a very different example, this is Carol Anderson's logic in the really wonderful book, White Rage, which is basically a history of white backlash from Reconstruction to, well, Obama's election, actually. And the new edition has a postscript after the 2016 election, illustrating why we find exactly that form of backlash. So where was I going with this? Oh, so there are more women, and there are, I think, more Muslim women, and there are more scholar activists. But I also think part of what we're witnessing is the breaking down of certain kinds of boundaries. It used to be, and what we're doing right now in this moment is a really good illustration of this. It used to be that, you know, the talks we gave at our mosque or to our student groups on campus were very different than the things we did in the undergraduate classroom, which were very different than the things we published for our specialized audiences comprised of colleagues within our disciplinary subfields. Now on social media, any of that may be accessible or with, you know, lectures posted online or any of these things, which is really good in some ways because we have democratization of access, but it can also be really difficult because it's very easy for things to be flattened and taken out of context. So the kind of thing that I'm going to say in an introductory book to women about women in Islam for an undergraduate audience is very different than the thing I would say to people in an advanced undergraduate / graduate seminar. But, you know, if little bits and pieces of things that I say in one place and another can be taken out of context and put in a mishmash, and we see, oh, well, these are contradictory, or it makes it very difficult actually to navigate those particular challenges. So I do think you see more scholar activism. I think that's partially an artifact of how public and accessible certain kinds of things can be. And I think there is a real upside to that, but I think there are also very real, I mean, I can say dangers and have it really not be an exaggeration, but I also think just sort of pitfalls in very mundane kinds of ways that when you confuse the levels of analysis and the projects that underlie these different things, contradictions sometimes appear where there really aren't contradictions if you look in a more nuanced and careful way.
If I can add just one thing, I think too there's a greater visibility of queer scholars as well, and we also have within the context of Islamic studies more Black scholars coming up as well, and the mere presence of the voices of Black scholars of Islam, queer scholars of Islam, cishet women speaking has been extremely disturbing to the status quo, as we recently saw in a listserv for the Islamic AER group. And so the mere fact of the presence and speech and the demands to have a voice and not backing down and the kind of terror that it has incited in those who have always felt that they controlled the academic narrative, I think is a really great sign that's falling to pieces. It always feels like that, you know, they're going to hold on, but my sense is that nobody's going to stop speaking, and so all those diverse voices are really going to come forward and push this whole thing over. And I just wanted to write into that list at one point, but had given up. You know, just say it's too late, guys. Just, you know, it's done. Go get a cup of coffee because it's over.
Suri, do you want to make your comment, or you just want to leave it in the chat? Let me know.
I'll just leave it in the chat, but I just want to just do a big shout out to everyone and say thank you so much for your amazing work, really, as an activist. I know, Juliana, you were saying like sometimes that the complexities of academia and whatnot make it challenging sometimes for activists, but I just want to say that I think like the rigor that academics bring to our work gives me so much courage to actually bring the work forward and do the work that we do, because the strength of the rigor provides a strength to the arguments and then gives me the courage, at least, to face up to patriarchal arguments that are made, you know, on the ground. So thank you so much.
Eileen, you wanted to share?
Okay. I'm not a scholar, so I usually don't comment or contribute anything because as less than a scholar, I don't have much worth sharing. But I wanted to share a little bit about my reactions to this series. I came to Islam in my 50s, and like Laurie talked about, I was a feminist, and it was extremely important to me in order to become a Muslim, which I started out researching to hate and ended up changing. But I knew I would not wear a hijab all the time. And if I had to, I wouldn't become a Muslim. And it had to be in sync with my feminist values. So I came to understand that the core of Islam was pro-woman. And I read Mernisi's book, and I read Amina's book, and they helped me feel confident and able to be a Muslim and be true to my values. And like Lori, I started running up against, dogma and culture and rules. But I guess I was old enough and stubborn enough that I wasn't going to change and be forced into anything. But I'm also a people pleaser, and I can't stand disapproval. So I really was uncomfortable, but I stuck to my guns. And I think initially I was able to do it because the Sufi group where I converted was supportive and focused more on the inner and the spiritual than the, legalistic rituals of compliance. And I did go to some mosques, but I would end up so angry when I left over, you're going to burn in hell if 2 hairs are showing, and you've got the khutbah was like, shake the ground under the enemy's Islam, and you're going to burn in hell if you have riba. And I would leave so angry that I felt like it was a threat to my faith. So I stopped going to any mosque except the Sufi one in Philly, which, I moved away from in 2008. So I found myself in the middle of rural North Carolina for a few years. And I think I was the only Muslim in the county. And I didn't tell people, and people didn't know. When I moved down there, being older, the heat got to me and I started wearing shorts. So I never greet a Muslim if I'm in shorts. But I haven't had community. And I've moved to Richmond in the last 2 years. And the mosques around here are mostly like one ethnic group or another, the women speaking a different language. And they're all far away from me. And I did recently go to one that was from W.D. Muhammad's group, and I liked it, but immediately COVID came and everything shut down. But I have to say that I get a couple, I'll probably tear up here. I get a couple emotional reactions when I hear these meetings, these discussions. First of all, I get so excited. I just love the material. I love the brains. I love intellectual stuff. I've always loved school, and it's so inspiring and exciting to me. And then I immediately want to read every book you've written. But I have 2,000 books, most of whom which I haven't read, and I'm trying to downplay because I'm going to be 77 this week. I'm trying to get rid of them, and I can't keep buying books. And the library around here is not a place where I could get any of these books, but I want them. The other thing that makes me sad is that I feel I was born 30 years too soon, because if I was born later, I'm sorry, I'm so emotional, I'd be one of you. I would have done it, but God had other plans for me. I got married and had 3 kids before I was 23, and I got my degree after that. But, I'd love to take, now everything's Zoom, maybe I could audit some courses, but my activist days are over. I'm not involved in any mosques. Right now I'm participating in some activities around racial justice, and I'm in a Muslim Jewish women's group. But I have to say that Amina Wadud and Mernisi got me here, and I don't know how long ago the online Progressive Muslims email list was. I think it was in the 90s. But that, and then how it morphed into MPV, I have to say, is my community. That's been my lifeline. That's been my community. That's been the validation for the way I practice Islam and not feeling guilty about it. And so I'm really grateful to everybody that's participated that and been there for me. And I think it's just wonderful that I get a chance to listen to all of you. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing. I have a private message that I'm going to read out, and then we're going to have to wind down, I'm sorry to say. And the question the comment and question is, thank you so much for the conversation, for all the work that all of you have done for scholarship. I'm a design scholar, which is also having its moments of reckoning with colonialism, patriarchy, racism, etc. today. Still a lot of work to do. I was wondering if you could point to some material practices that create safe spaces for this kind of feminist or otherwise inclusive work in Islam. These might include artifact making, meaning making, space making, and just any example of material practices. Anybody have any recommendations?
I can't think of anything material beyond just finding. I mean, I think the thing that we're hearing a lot of people say in the texts and here is that we need community. And so making community however you can find it, that the loneliness we feel, there's this idea that there's this ummah out there and that we're all part of this larger community, but we all know the divisions are very, very real, and not just between the various kinds of Shia and the various kinds of Sunni and all the rest, but even within these smaller groups, that the divisiveness is something that can be extremely disheartening. And so finding community wherever you can, whether that be online or otherwise, so that you have some sense of a path forward.
I am finding that amongst the queer activists, that they are actually forming networks that allow them to do other forms of expression, and that actually teach ways to integrate rather than to have things always, be sort of in separate silos. But I don't have a specific reference, so I'm sorry about that. Eleanor offered if anybody was interested in calligraphy, so those people who connected to the page, I think, can connect with her there. I just want to say, one of the reasons why I, came to this idea about friends along the way is because as an analog woman in the digital age, I have understood that the alienation that I often feel in terms of specific compositions of community, especially as an African American woman who's Muslim, is so graciously balanced out by friends that maybe I don't see them all the time, or like with COVID, we're doing more meetings and stuff like that. I keep making jokes on my social media because I'm retired, and yet I seem to be doing more interviews just because everybody's online now. But I really, I really feel the grace in the possibility of being in touch with people, even if I do not get to sit down with them. We did our 2 Eids online, and I gave khutbahs for both of them, by the way. One of them was here locally in Indonesia, the same group that we did Tarawih with online, and I led some of the Tarawih prayers. So I'm really resonating with the fact that I have been really fortunate in my life to be able to withstand the vitriol, patriarchal spewings of the academy, and at the same time am so much more enriched, and therefore I'm learning to be grateful and therefore give much more attention to people like Dr. Julian Hammer, Dr. Keisha Ali, and Dr. Laurie Silver, among many others, obviously in the gallery. So I want to say a thank you to you for joining me. I hope to see you again, and I will make available a consolidated copy of these two separate recordings, because that's what ends up happening, which means it'll take me a little bit longer, but I will share it with you, and otherwise I will only put it in the Patreon page that I started as a place to have community, by the way. But in about a week, I will also make it public, because I really think that it's worth sharing with everybody, because you're worth sharing with everybody. So thank you. Thank you all the members of the gallery, especially people who